Hello, boys and girls. Today we will be focusing on a reading strategy. Good readers use reading strategies before, during, and after reading a text. It is when you actively think about the ideas of the text that you're about to understand or comprehend. It is an action that you take to remember and comprehend, and it is something that you do intentionally or on purpose to increase your chances of understanding and comprehending a text. Our reading strategy for today is summarizing. This is our objective for today. We are learning to summarize a text. Good readers summarize during and after reading. So you can summarize while you're in the middle of a text, and you can do it multiple times while reading a text, or you can summarize after, when you have read the entire text. So now that we've talked about what a reading strategy is, what our strategy of the day is, and when we apply this strategy, you might be asking, what exactly is this strategy? So what is this? A summary is a short, sequential recap of only the most important events and details of a story, in your own words. And remember, sequential just means in time order. So when you're summarizing, all you're doing is retelling the story in order, using only the most important events and using your own words. So you might ask me, why do I summarize? Well, there's many reasons why we would summarize. We first summarize to focus on and identify the key events. And when I say key events, I just mean important events. We summarize to remember the text. And finally, we summarize to check comprehension of the text, meaning checking whether or not we truly understand what's going on. That's all that comprehension is. So when you summarize, you must make a long story short. Because of Winn-Dixie is such a long story, it's multiple pages long. But we can cut out some of the unimportant events and details and focus on the meat and the potatoes, meaning the good stuff. When I have dinner, meat and potatoes is the good stuff in my opinion. So again, we're just focusing on the meat and potatoes of the story, the most important details, to make it short. So we go from pages and pages and pages of a story down to maybe a paragraph, maybe two. So you might now be asking me, how do I summarize? Well, let's first take a look on how we summarize during reading, when that book is open and you've read only a couple pages and need to check your understanding. So summarizing during reading, you must first read part of the text, maybe only 1 or 2 pages at a time. Second, you would pause reading. And while you pause reading, you'll take your third step, which is to think about the important events of the text so far. So over that 1 to 2 pages, what was most important? And then finally, the fourth step is to retell those important parts in order. That's how you would check understanding during reading using the summarizing strategy. Well, what about after reading? What about when you're done reading the entire text? Well, first, you would read that entire text. Second, you would think about the important events of the entire text. Remember, the meat and potatoes, just the good stuff. And your last step, or your third step, is to retell the important parts in order. And that's how you would summarize to check understanding after reading an entire text or story. So, it's as easy as telling the important events across your hands using sequential words, or your time order words, such as first, next, then, after that, and in the end or finally. Let's practice. I'm going to reread pages 22 to 26. I would like you guys to follow along if you have the text in front of you. And as I read these, or after I read these pages, I'm going to show you how I would summarize so far across my hand using time, order, and sequential words. Here we go. I'm on page 22. 10-year-old Opal is a newcomer in the town of Naomi, Florida. She hasn't made any friends yet, and she feels a little lonely. Opal's only pal is a very big dog, named after the grocery store where she found him, Winn-Dixie. I spent a lot of time that summer at the Herman W. Block Memorial Library. The Herman W. Block Memorial Library sounds like it would be a big fancy place, but it's not. It's just a little old house full of books, and Miss Franny Block is in charge of them all. She is a very small, very old woman with short gray hair, and she was the first friend I made in Naomi. It all started with Winn-Dixie not liking it when I went into the library because he couldn't go inside too. But I showed him how he could stand up on his hind legs and look in the window and see me in there, selecting my books, and he was okay, as long as he could see me. But the thing was, the first time Miss Franny Block saw Winn-Dixie standing up on his hind legs like that, looking in the window, she didn't think he was a dog. She thought he was a bear. This is what happened. I was picking out my books and kind of humming to myself, and all of a sudden there was this loud and scary scream. I went running up to the front of the library, and there was Miss Franny Block sitting on the floor behind her desk. "Miss Franny," I said, "are you all right?" "A bear," she said. "A bear?" I asked. "He has come back," she said. "He has?" I asked. "Where is he?" "Out there," she said, and raised a finger and pointed at Winn-Dixie, standing up on his hind legs, looking in the window for me. "Miss Franny Block," I said, "that's not a bear, that's a dog. That's my dog, Winn-Dixie." "Are you positive?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I told her. "I'm positive. He's my dog. I would know him anywhere." Miss Franny sat there trembling and shaking. "Come on," I said. "Let me help you up. It's okay." I stuck out my hand, and Miss Franny took a hold of it, and I pulled her up off the floor. She didn't weigh hardly anything at all. Once she was standing on her feet, she started acting all embarrassed, saying how I must think she was a silly old lady, mistaking a dog for a bear, but that she had a bad experience with a bear coming into the Herman W. Block Memorial Library a long time ago, and she had never quite gotten over it. "When did it happen?" I asked her. "Well," said Miss Franny, "it's a very long story." "That's okay," I told her. "I'm like my mama in that I like to be told stories. But before you start telling it, can Winn-Dixie come in and listen too? He gets lonely without me." "Well, I don't know," said Miss Franny. "Dogs are not allowed in the Herman W. Block Memorial Library." "He'll be good," I told her. "He's a dog who goes to church." And before she could say yes or no, I went outside and got Winn-Dixie, and he came in and lay down with a humph and a sigh right at Miss Franny's feet. She looked down at him and said, "He most certainly is a large dog." "Yes, ma'am," I told her. "He has a large heart, too." "Well," Miss Franny said. She bent over and gave Winn-Dixie a pat on the head. Winn-Dixie wagged his tail back and forth and snuffed his nose on her little old lady feet. Let me get a chair and sit down so I can tell the story properly. Back when Florida was wild, when it consisted of nothing but palmetto trees and mosquitoes so big they could fly away with you," Miss Franny Black started in. "And I was just a little girl, no bigger than you. My father, Herman W. Black, told me that I could have anything I wanted for my birthday. Anything at all." Miss Franny looked around the library. She leaned in close to me. "I don't want to appear prideful," she said, "but my daddy was a very rich man. A very rich man." She nodded and then leaned back and said, "And I was a little girl who loved to read, so I told him, I said, 'Daddy, I would most certainly love to have a library for my birthday. A small little library would be wonderful.'" "You asked for a whole library?" "A small one," Miss Franny nodded. "I wanted a little house full of nothing but books, and I wanted to share them too. And I got my wish. My father built me this house, the very one we are standing in now, and at a very young age, I became a librarian. Yes, ma'am." "What about the bear?" I said. "Did I mention that Florida was wild in those days?" Miss Franny Black said. "Uh-huh, you did." "It was wild. There were wild men and wild women and wild animals." "Like bears." "Yes, ma'am, that's right. Now I have to tell you, I was a little Miss Know-it-all. I was a Miss Smarty Pants with my library full of books. Oh, yes, ma'am, I thought I knew the answers to everything. Well, one hot Thursday I was sitting in my library with all the doors and windows open, and my nose stuck in a book when a shadow crossed the desk. And without looking up, yes, ma'am, without even looking up, I said, 'Is there a book I can help you find?' Well, there was no answer, and I thought it might have been a wild man or a wild woman, scared of all these books and afraid to speak up. But then I became very aware of a peculiar smell, a very strong smell. I raised my eyes slowly, and standing right in front of me was a bear. Yes, ma'am, a very large bear." "How big?" I asked. "Oh, well," said Miss Franny, "perhaps 3 times the size of your dog." All right, boys and girls, so I just completed the first step. I read part of the text. Now I want to pause and think about it. That's steps 2 and 3. Think about just the important parts. So why don't you pause and think about just the important parts as well. So now that we've read part of the text, paused, and thought about the most important events, let's go ahead and tell those important events in sequential order across our hand. So, first, Opal goes to the library and leaves Winn-Dixie outside. That was the very first thing that happened. Next, Miss Franny sees Winn-Dixie looking in the window. Then she gets scared because she thinks Winn-Dixie is a bear. After that, Opal calms Miss Franny by explaining that Winn-Dixie is a dog. And in the end, Miss Franny tells Opal a story about an experience long ago when a bear came into the library. So we went from pages 22 to 26 all the way down to a 4-sentence summary. And it was only the important details, it was in time order, and it was in our own words. Let's practice another one. I'm going to keep reading. I'll read the next 2 pages, and we'll do the same steps. "Then what happened?" I asked her. "Well," said Miss Franny, "I looked at him, and he looked at me. He put his big nose up in the air and sniffed as if he was trying to decide if a little Miss Know-it-all librarian was what he was in the mood to eat. And I sat there. And then I thought, well, if this bear intends to eat me, I'm not going to let it happen without a fight. No, ma'am." So very slowly and very carefully I raised up the book I was reading. "What book was that?" I asked. Why, it was War and Peace, a very large book. I raised it up slowly, and then I aimed it carefully, and I threw it right at that bear and screamed, "Be gone!" And do you know what? "No, ma'am," I said. He went, but this is what I will never forget. He took the book with him. "Nuh-uh," I said. "Yes, ma'am," said Miss Franny. "He snatched it up and ran." "Did he come back?" I asked. "No, I never saw him again." Well, the men in town used to tease me about it. They used to say, "Miss Franny, we saw that bear of yours out in the woods today. He was reading that book, and he said it sure was good, and would it be all right if he kept it for just another week?" Yes, ma'am, they teased me about it. She sighed. I imagine I'm the only one left from those days. I imagine I'm the only one that even recalls that bear. All my friends, everyone I knew when I was young, they're all dead and gone. She sighed again. She looked sad and old and wrinkled. It was the same way I felt sometimes, being friendless in a new town and not having a mama to comfort me. I sighed too. Winn-Dixie raised his head off his paws and looked back and forth between me and Miss Franny. He sat up then and showed Miss Franny his teeth. "Well, now look at that," she said. "That dog is smiling at me." "It's a talent of his," I told her. "It is a fine talent," Miss Franny said, "a very fine talent." And she smiled back at Winn-Dixie. "We could be friends," I said to Miss Franny. "I mean, you and me and Winn-Dixie, we could all be friends." Miss Franny smiled even bigger. "Why, that would be grand," she said. "Just grand." And right at that minute, right when the three of us had decided to be friends, who should come marching into Herman W. Black Memorial Library but old pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson. She walked right up to Miss Franny's desk and said, "I finished Johnny Tremain, and I enjoyed it very much. I would like something even more difficult to read now because I am an advanced reader." All right, we did the first step, which is to read 1 to 2 pages of the text. Now we're going to pause. And we're also going to think about the most important events from these 2 pages. Okay, now let's retell the events from these 2 pages. First, Miss Franny is in the middle of her story about her encounter with the bear in the library. Next, Miss Franny finishes her story. Then Miss Franny sees Winn-Dixie smile, and she's no longer afraid of him. After that, Opal suggests that she, Miss Franny, and Winn-Dixie become friends. In the end, Miss Franny agrees that they all can be friends. So over the course of these 2 long pages, we were able to think of only the important events, the meat and potatoes, and get it down to about 4 sentences. That's a great summary. Now it's your turn. On Google Classroom, complete the worksheet on summarizing the entire story because of Winn-Dixie. Feel free to rewatch the Edpuzzle Read Aloud to refresh your memory or read along in the text. Great job, boys and girls.